Hello and welcome back to the Calm Curator. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend this quiet hour with me wherever you might be in the world right now. Perhaps you're settling in for the evening, or maybe you're finding a peaceful moment in the middle of a busy day. However you found your way here, I hope this time together brings you a sense of calm and wonder. Before we begin our journey today, I'm curious, what's been occupying your thoughts lately? Are you listening while taking a gentle walk, or perhaps curled up somewhere comfortable as the day winds down? I'd love to know what corner of the world you're experiencing this from, and what draws you to these quiet explorations of history and beauty. The comments are always such a lovely space for our community to connect, so please feel free to share what's on your mind or heart. Today, we're going to step away from the rush of modern life and travel back through time to discover something truly extraordinary. We'll be exploring how some of humanity's most magnificent buildings, Gothic cathedrals, served as giant books written not in words, but in stone and light. These weren't just places of worship, but entire libraries designed for people who couldn't read, architectural manuscripts that told stories to anyone willing to step inside and look up in wonder. So find a comfortable place to settle in, take a deep breath, and let's journey together into a world where buildings themselves could speak, where every arch and window held secrets waiting to be discovered. Close your eyes if you'd like and let me paint you a picture of another time, another world. Picture, if you will, a morning in the 13th century. Mist clings to cobblestone streets as the first light of dawn breaks across a medieval town. The air carries the scent of wood smoke and fresh bread, mingling with the distant sound of hammers against stone. Above the low-slung houses and narrow alleyways, something extraordinary rises against the pale sky. A cathedral, its twin towers reaching toward heaven like stone prayers frozen in time. In this world, where the written word belongs to the privileged few, where most souls cannot decipher the mysterious marks that scholars call letters, there exists another kind of book entirely. This book is written not in ink upon parchment, but in limestone and marble, in colored glass and carved relief. It speaks not to the eyes that scan across pages, but to the heart that quickens at beauty, to the mind that seeks meaning in symbol and story. The Gothic cathedral, rising from the earth like a mountain shaped by divine hands, is perhaps humanity's most ambitious attempt to create a book written in stone and light. A manuscript that could be read by anyone who possessed the courage to step through its doors and lift their gaze upward. As we stand in that imagined medieval square, watching the cathedral emerge from morning shadow, we might wonder what stories these walls contain, what secrets hide within the intricate dance of buttress and spire, what messages wait encoded in the jeweled windows that catch and transform the sun's rays into something approaching the sacred. For the medieval mind, entering a cathedral was like opening the most precious manuscript in existence, one whose pages were vast halls filled with light, whose illustrations moved with the changing hours, whose text spoke in the universal language of symbol and stone. The very idea that a building could serve as literature might seem strange to our modern sensibilities, accustomed as we are to the printed word, to stories contained within the neat boundaries of books. Yet in an age when literacy was the rare privilege of clergy and nobility, when most people would live their entire lives without ever learning to read a single sentence, the cathedral served as something far more than mere architecture. It was pedagogy carved in stone, theology rendered visible, history made tangible through the patient work of countless hands across countless years. To understand the cathedral as manuscript, we must first appreciate the profound illiteracy that characterized medieval life. Imagine a world where the vast majority of people, perhaps 9 out of every 10, could not read their own names if written before them. In such a world, knowledge moved not through books but through stories told by firelight, through songs passed down from parent to child, through the intricate visual narratives that adorned church walls and illuminated prayer books glimpsed during rare visits from traveling priests. The Church, recognizing this reality, embraced what Pope Gregory the Great had called books for the unlettered, the idea that sacred stories and moral lessons could be taught through images as effectively as through words. But the Gothic cathedral took this concept to unprecedented heights, creating not merely illustrated walls, but entire environments that functioned as three-dimensional manuscripts, where every element from floor plan to foundation stone carried layers of symbolic meaning. Consider the basic orientation of a Gothic cathedral, seemingly simple yet profound in its implications. Like a body at rest, the cathedral lies along an east-west axis, its head, the altar and sanctuary, pointing toward Jerusalem, toward the rising sun, toward the promise of resurrection. This is no accident of design, but a deliberate theological statement written into the very bones of the building. The faithful enter from the west, from the realm of darkness and spiritual ignorance, and process eastward toward enlightenment, toward the light of Christ symbolized by the dawn. This journey from west to east mirrors the soul's progress from sin to salvation, from earthly concerns to heavenly aspiration. The cathedral's floor plan, viewed from above, forms a cross, the ultimate Christian symbol embedded in the building's DNA. The transepts extend like arms, while the nave stretches forward like a path, and the chancel rises like a head lifted in prayer. Every measurement, every proportion, speaks in the mathematical language that medieval thinkers believed revealed the hidden harmonies of God's creation. But perhaps nowhere is the cathedral's role as illuminated manuscript more evident than in its revolutionary treatment of light. The Gothic style, emerging in 12th century France like an architectural revolution, transformed the heavy, earth-bound Romanesque churches that came before into something approaching the ethereal. Where Romanesque churches had small windows set deep in thick walls, Gothic cathedrals opened their walls to light through an ingenious system of flying buttresses and pointed arches that channeled weight and thrust with unprecedented efficiency. The result was architecture that seemed to deny its own materiality, walls that dissolved into luminous veils of colored glass. These windows were far more than decorative elements. They were the cathedral's most eloquent pages, telling stories in a medium that transformed base sunlight into something approaching the divine. The medieval mind, steeped in Platonic philosophy filtered through Christian theology, understood light not as mere physical phenomenon, but as the closest earthly approximation to God's presence. God is light, proclaimed the Gospel of John, and in the colored radiance that streamed through Gothic windows, the faithful could glimpse something of that ultimate reality. The great rose windows that bloom like stone flowers on cathedral facades represent perhaps the most sophisticated expression of this light language. These circular masterpieces, sometimes 40 feet across, organize hundreds of pieces of colored glass into mandalas of incredible complexity. The rose window at Chartres, for instance, tells the story of Christ's genealogy through a radiating pattern that begins with Jesse at the center and branches outward to encompass the entire lineage leading to the Savior. But the story operates on multiple levels simultaneously: genealogical, theological, and cosmic. The circular form itself speaks in the ancient language of sacred geometry. The circle, having no beginning and no end, represents eternity, perfection, the divine nature that encompasses all creation. The radiating pattern echoes the medieval understanding of how divine light emanates from God to illuminate the created world. The colors themselves carry meaning: blue for heaven and divine truth, red for Christ's sacrifice and divine love, purple for royalty and penance, white for purity and resurrection. When sunlight passes through these carefully orchestrated hues, it creates an ever-changing symphony of color that moves across the cathedral's interior like visible music. The positioning of windows within the cathedral follows its own grammar. The clerestory windows high above the nave bathe the space in celestial light, while the lower windows of the aisles create more intimate pools of illumination. The great west window often depicts the Last Judgment, so that the setting sun streaming through it reminds the faithful of the final accounting that awaits all souls. The east windows behind the altar might show scenes of Christ's passion and resurrection, illuminated by the rising sun that symbolizes new life and hope. But the Gothic cathedral's mastery of light extends beyond its windows to embrace the architecture itself. The pointed arch, Gothic architecture's most distinctive feature, creates a sense of upward movement that seems to lift both eye and spirit toward heaven. Unlike the Roman semicircular arch, which creates a sense of stable completion, the Gothic pointed arch suggests aspiration, in completion, the soul's eternal yearning for union with the divine. This architectural vocabulary of aspiration reaches its full expression in the cathedral's revolutionary verticality. Where earlier churches hugged the earth, Gothic cathedrals saw upward with an audacity that still takes the breath away. The nave of Beauvais Cathedral reaches nearly 160 feet above the floor, a height that would not be surpassed until the age of steel and concrete. Standing in such a space, the visitor experiences a fundamental shift in perspective. The everyday world of horizontal movement, of earthbound concerns, gives way to a vertical realm where the spirit feels called upward toward mysteries that exist beyond the boundaries of ordinary experience. This verticality required engineering innovations that were themselves expressions of medieval faith and ingenuity. The flying buttress, perhaps Gothic architecture's most distinctive external feature, represents a brilliant solution to the problem of supporting incredibly tall walls pierced by enormous windows. These graceful stone arcs reach across space to channel the outward thrust of the vaulted ceiling down to massive buttresses planted firmly in the earth. The result is a structural system that seems to defy gravity, creating the illusion that these massive stone buildings are somehow weightless, held aloft by faith rather than engineering. Yet the flying buttress functions as more than structural necessity. It serves as visual metaphor. These stone bridges reaching across empty air suggest the medieval understanding of how divine grace spans the gap between earthly and heavenly realms. They speak of connection across apparent separation, of support arriving from unexpected sources, of the way spiritual architecture mirrors spiritual truth. The vaulted ceiling itself tells its own story in stone. The ribbed vaults of Gothic architecture create patterns that draw the eye ever upward, following the intersection of curved surfaces toward a vanishing point that exists somewhere beyond the physical boundaries of the building. These stone webs, supported by slender columns that bundle like stems of stone flowers, create spaces that feel both massive and delicate, permanent and ethereal. Walking through a Gothic cathedral, one becomes aware of how every architectural element contributes to a unified symbolic narrative. The columns that support the building rise like petrified trees, their capitals often carved with foliage that speaks of the natural world transformed by divine touch. The triforium, that middle story between the arcade and clerestory, creates a rhythm of arches that suggests infinite progression, endless repetition of forms that mirror the mathematical harmonies medieval thinkers believed underlay all creation. But the cathedral's role as illuminated manuscript extends far beyond its basic architectural grammar to encompass a vast library of sculptural narratives carved directly into the stone. The facades of Gothic cathedrals function like the frontispieces of medieval books, offering complex visual programs that could occupy a lifetime of contemplation. At Notre Dame de Paris, the west facade presents three great portals, each dedicated to a different aspect of Christian story and teaching. The central portal typically depicts the Last Judgment, with Christ in majesty surrounded by the four symbols of the evangelists, while ranks of saints and angels arrange themselves in careful hierarchies across the surrounding archivolts. Below, the damned and the saved march toward their eternal destinies with expressions that range from terror to beatific joy. This is theater carved in stone, drama that unfolds across multiple levels of meaning for viewers who approach with eyes trained to read its symbolic language. The side portals might tell the stories of the Virgin Mary or chronicle the lives of local saints, creating a comprehensive program that addresses both universal Christian themes and particular regional devotions. Every figure, every gesture, every attribute carries meaning for those who know how to decode the visual vocabulary. St. Peter holds the keys to heaven, St. James bears the pilgrim's staff, St. Lawrence carries the gridiron of his martyrdom. These are not merely decorative elements, but components of a vast mnemonic system that helped medieval viewers remember and internalize the stories that define their spiritual universe. The tympana, those semicircular spaces above the doors, function like the title pages of chapters, announcing the themes that will be developed in smaller detail throughout the surrounding sculpture. The careful arrangement of figures follows theological hierarchies and narrative logic that reveal the sophisticated intellectual framework underlying medieval art. Christ occupies the center and summit of compositions, with the Virgin Mary, saints, prophets, and angels arranged in descending orders of sanctity and importance. But perhaps nowhere is the cathedral's function as popular manuscript more evident than in its treatment of those creatures that exist at the margins of the sacred narrative. Gargoyles, those fantastic waterspouts that project from the building's exterior, serve the practical purpose of channeling rainwater away from the walls, while simultaneously populating the cathedral's external spaces with a menagerie of demons, monsters, and grotesques that speak to medieval anxieties about the spiritual dangers that lurk beyond the sanctuary's protective boundaries. These creatures, carved with remarkable imagination and often surprising humor, represent the forces of chaos and evil that Christianity promised to hold at bay. Positioned at the cathedral's edges, they suggest the containment of spiritual darkness by sacred architecture. They are the visual equivalent of the marginal illustrations that populated medieval manuscripts, where scribes would doodle fantastic creatures and comic scenes in the borders surrounding sacred text. Like those manuscript margins, the cathedral's gargoyles provide space for imagination to explore themes that complement and complicate the main narrative. Inside the cathedral, the carved misericords, those small hinged seats in the choir stalls that provided discreet support for clergy during long services, offer their own collection of marginal narratives. Here, craftsmen carved scenes from daily life alongside moral allegories and bestiary tales. A fox preaching to geese might illustrate the dangers of false teaching, while a musician playing to an audience of animals could represent the harmony that results from proper spiritual order. These small carvings, hidden in the shadows beneath hinged seats, remind us that the cathedral's symbolic program extended into every corner, every detail, creating a comprehensive environment where sacred and secular, profound and playful, existed in carefully balanced tension. The bestiary tradition, so prominent in medieval art and literature, finds full expression in cathedral sculpture. Lions represent Christ's resurrection power, pelicans symbolize self-sacrifice through the belief that they fed their young with blood from their own breasts, peacocks suggest immortality because their flesh was thought not to decay. These animal symbols, derived from classical sources filtered through Christian interpretation, created a parallel vocabulary of meaning that enriched the cathedral's symbolic language. For medieval viewers, these creatures were not mere decorations, but elements in a comprehensive system of correspondence that connected the natural and supernatural worlds. The foliate capitals that crown the cathedral's columns deserve particular attention for the way they transform architectural necessity into spiritual metaphor. These stone bouquets, carved with leaves and flowers from both real and imaginary plants, suggest the Garden of Eden, the promised paradise that awaits the faithful. But they also speak to the medieval understanding of how divine creativity works through natural forms, transforming base matter into expressions of transcendent beauty. The craftsmen who carved these capitals were participating in what medieval theology understood as the divine creative act, bringing order and beauty out of formless stone. The careful integration of all these sculptural elements into the cathedral's overall design reveals the sophisticated planning that coordinated multiple workshops over decades or centuries. Master masons worked from detailed plans that specified not only structural elements, but also iconographic programs, ensuring that the building's symbolic narrative would unfold coherently across its entire surface. This planning process itself reflects the medieval understanding of how divine providence works through human agency, coordinating multiple individual efforts toward a unified transcendent purpose. The construction of a Gothic cathedral represented one of medieval civilization's most ambitious collective undertakings, a project that typically spanned multiple generations and required the coordination of thousands of individuals working toward a common goal. Unlike modern construction projects, driven by immediate practical needs and constrained by financial deadlines, cathedral building operated according to different temporal rhythms, different measures of success and completion. The cathedral was, in the most literal sense, a community effort. Entire towns organized themselves around the great work, with guilds contributing specialized expertise while ordinary citizens provided labor, materials, and financial support according to their means. Wealthy merchants might donate entire windows or chapels, while humble craftsmen offered their particular skills. Even children participated, carrying stones and mortar, learning the trades that would occupy their adult lives within the cathedral's shadow. This collective effort created social bonds that extended far beyond the construction site itself. The cathedral building project served as a focus for community identity, a source of civic pride that could unite populations across social divisions that might otherwise prove divisive. Towns competed with one another to create the most beautiful, the tallest, the most innovative cathedrals, engaging in architectural rivalries that pushed the boundaries of engineering and artistic possibility. The master masons who directed these projects occupied positions of extraordinary responsibility and social status. Unlike anonymous medieval craftsmen working in other trades, master masons often achieved individual recognition, their names recorded in church documents and sometimes carved into the buildings themselves. These men verdier, and they were virtually always men in the medieval context verdier, combined technical engineering expertise with artistic vision and managerial skills that allowed them to coordinate complex projects across decades. The Masonic lodges that grew up around cathedral construction sites became centers of technical innovation and craft knowledge transmission. Young men served apprenticeships that could last 7 years or more, learning not only the practical skills of stone cutting and construction, but also the geometric and mathematical principles that underlay Gothic design. This knowledge was closely guarded, passed down through guild traditions that maintained professional standards while protecting trade secrets. The financing of cathedral construction reveals the complex economic relationships that characterized medieval society. While bishops and chapters provided overall direction and significant financial resources, cathedral building required contributions from every level of society. Pilgrimage revenues helped fund construction, as did income from cathedral schools, fairs held in cathedral precincts, and the sale of indulgences that promised spiritual benefits to contributors. The economic impact of cathedral construction extended far beyond the immediate building project. These massive undertakings created demand for stone, timber, metal, and glass that could affect entire regional economies. The limestone quarries that supplied Notre Dame de Paris employed hundreds of workers across several centuries, while the forests that provided oak timbers for cathedral roofs required careful management to ensure sustainable harvesting over generations. The temporal rhythm of cathedral construction created unique relationships between the living and the dead, between present effort and future completion. Workers began projects they knew they would never see finished, while later generations inherited responsibilities they had not chosen but accepted as sacred trusts. This continuity across time reflects the medieval understanding of how divine purpose operates through historical process, achieving ultimate goals through the accumulated efforts of many individuals across many lifetimes. The building process itself became a kind of pilgrimage, a spiritual journey that paralleled the physical act of construction. Craftsmen spoke of their work in explicitly religious terms, understanding their labor as a form of prayer, their technical skills as gifts from God meant to serve divine purposes. The cathedral building site became a space where practical and spiritual concerns intersected, where earthly craft served heavenly aspiration. This understanding of work as worship permeated every aspect of cathedral construction. Stone carvers approached their tasks as forms of meditation, finding spiritual significance in the patient transformation of raw material into expressions of transcendent beauty. Glassmakers understood their craft as a participation in divine creativity, transforming sand and fire into windows that would channel heavenly light for centuries to come. The cathedral's emergence from this collective effort across time creates a unique kind of a uthorsip verdier, not the individual genius celebrated in Renaissance and modern art, but a communal creativity that spans generations and encompasses entire communities. The cathedral becomes a palimpsest of human effort, with each generation adding its own layers to an evolving masterpiece that never achieves final completion, but continues to grow and change across centuries. This temporal dimension of cathedral construction parallels the liturgical calendar that governs religious observance, with different seasons marked by particular construction activities. Spring brought the renewal of building campaigns after winter's enforced pause, while autumn required preparation for the cold months when only interior work could continue. The rhythm of construction mirrored the rhythm of agricultural life, with harvest festivals providing occasions for special fundraising efforts and community celebration of the year's progress. The cathedral's completion verdier, if indeed such massive projects ever truly achieve completion verdier, marked not an end but a beginning. The building's dedication created a sacred space that would serve its community across centuries, but also established ongoing responsibilities for maintenance, renovation, and adaptation to changing needs. Medieval communities understood cathedral construction as the beginning of a perpetual relationship, a commitment that would bind future generations to preserve and enhance what earlier generations had created. Standing today within the soaring spaces of a Gothic cathedral, we encounter architecture that functions on multiple temporal levels simultaneously. The building embodies the medieval past that created it while continuing to serve present needs and pointing toward future possibilities. The stones tell stories not only of medieval faith and craftsmanship, but also of centuries of subsequent history verdier, Reformation controversies, revolutionary destructions, romantic revivals, modern restorations. The experience of entering a Gothic cathedral remains remarkably consistent across centuries, despite vast changes in the cultural context that surrounds these buildings. The initial moment of stepping from street level into the cathedral's interior creates a sensory shift that transcends historical period. The temperature drops several degrees, creating a coolness that suggests refuge from worldly heat. The acoustic environment changes dramatically, with ordinary conversation giving way to whispered reverence as the space itself seems to call for lowered voices and slowed movement. The vertical dimension reasserts itself immediately, drawing the gaze upward along columns that seem to stretch toward infinity. The eye follows the ribs of the vaulted ceiling as they converge and separate in stone patterns that suggest both mathematical precision and organic growth. The play of light through colored windows creates an ever-changing environment that transforms throughout the day, with morning illumination yielding to afternoon warmth and evening shadows that gradually claim the building's furthest reaches. This encounter with Gothic space operates below the level of conscious interpretation, affecting visitors through direct sensory experience before intellectual understanding begins to decode the symbolic programs embedded in architectural detail. The cathedral's function as manuscript in stone and light begins with this immediate bodily response to proportion, height, luminosity, and acoustic resonance. Only after this initial impact do the specific stories carved in stone and gleaming in glass begin to emerge into conscious awareness. Modern visitors, even those who arrive without any background in Christian theology or medieval history, often report profound emotional responses to Gothic cathedral spaces. These responses suggest that the architectural language developed by medieval builders continues to speak across cultural and temporal boundaries, addressing something fundamental in human nature that responds to beauty, scale, and the careful orchestration of light and space. The durability of Gothic cathedrals, their persistence across centuries of war, revolution, neglect, and restoration, speaks to both the physical robustness of their construction and the cultural value that successive generations have found in preserving these architectural manuscripts. Each generation has read these buildings somewhat differently, finding meanings that reflect contemporary concerns while maintaining connection to the original medieval vision. The Romantic movement of the 18th and 19th centuries discovered in Gothic cathedrals an architecture of emotion and imagination that contrasted sharply with classical rationality. Writers like Victor Hugo and architects like Hugues Gerrior and Viollet-le-Duc saw in Gothic architecture an expression of democratic creativity, a folk art that emerged from collective rather than aristocratic effort. This interpretation, while historically questionable in some of its details, helped ensure the preservation and restoration of many cathedrals that might otherwise have been lost to neglect or deliberate destruction. The 20th century brought new appreciation for the engineering innovations that made Gothic architecture possible, recognizing in flying buttresses and ribbed vaults sophisticated solutions to structural problems that anticipated modern architectural concerns. Contemporary architects have found inspiration in Gothic space-making techniques, learning from medieval masters how to create environments that uplift the human spirit while serving practical needs. Today's preservation efforts represent perhaps the most comprehensive attempt yet made to understand Gothic cathedrals in their full complexity. Modern restoration techniques can analyze the chemical composition of stones, trace the sources of materials, and reconstruct construction sequences with unprecedented precision. Digital technology allows three-dimensional documentation of architectural details that can preserve knowledge of craftsmanship techniques for future generations, while enabling virtual experiences of cathedral spaces for those who cannot visit them in person. Yet for all our technological sophistication, the essential experience of encountering a Gothic cathedral remains remarkably similar to what medieval visitors would have felt. The buildings continue to function as they were intended, creating environments that lift the human spirit and provide spaces for contemplation, wonder, and encounter with transcendent beauty. They remain manuscripts written in stone and light, still capable of being read by anyone who possesses the patience to enter their doors and allow their architectural language to work its subtle magic. The Gothic Cathedral's endurance as a form of architecture speaks to its success in addressing perennial human needs that transcend specific religious or cultural contexts. These buildings created spaces for gathering and solitude, for celebration and mourning, for the mundane requirements of community life and the extraordinary moments when human beings confront ultimate questions about meaning, purpose, and transcendence. The hidden language of Gothic cathedrals ultimately reveals itself to be not so hidden after all, but rather written in symbols and forms that speak directly to human experience across centuries and cultures. The aspiration toward height that characterizes Gothic architecture mirrors the human desire for transcendence. The careful orchestration of light reflects our need for illumination, both literal and metaphorical. The intricate stone narratives provide the stories that help us understand our place within larger patterns of meaning and purpose. Standing in the nave of Chartres or Notre Dame, Salisbury or Cologne, we find ourselves reading from the same manuscript that guided medieval pilgrims, craftsmen, and communities across the centuries of cathedral building. The text continues to reveal new meanings while maintaining its essential message that human beings can create through patient collective effort across generations, environments that serve not only practical needs, but also the deepest longings of the human spirit for beauty, meaning, and connection to something greater than individual existence. The Gothic cathedral endures as perhaps civilization's most successful attempt to create architecture that functions simultaneously as shelter and scripture, as practical building and transcendent art, as individual achievement and collective expression. In an age when much of what we build is designed for obsolescence, when the pace of change threatens to sever our connections to historical continuity, these ancient buildings remind us that some human creations aspire to permanence, that some stories deserve to be written in materials that can endure across centuries. The hidden language of Gothic cathedrals, revealed through patient attention to their architectural grammar and sculptural vocabulary, ultimately points beyond itself to the enduring human capacity for creating meaning through beauty, for finding transcendence through craft, for building spaces that honor both the practical necessities of community life and the spiritual aspirations that distinguish human culture at its finest. In learning to read these manuscripts of stone and light, we discover not only the medieval past that created them, but also the continuing possibilities for creating architecture that serves the full range of human needs, practical and spiritual, individual and communal, temporal and eternal. These cathedrals stand today as archives of human hope, repositories of the conviction that beauty matters, that craftsmanship deserves preservation, that spaces designed for transcendence continue to serve essential functions in human community. They remind us that some things cannot be reduced to immediate utility or economic calculation, that the greatest human achievements often result from commitments that span multiple lifetimes and serve purposes that transcend individual ambition. The Gothic cathedral's message, written in stone and proclaimed through light, speaks ultimately of the human capacity for creating meaning through collective effort, for building bridges between earthly and transcendent realms, for crafting environments that honor both human scale and cosmic aspiration. In a world increasingly defined by speed, disposability, and individual achievement, these ancient buildings offer alternative models of how human communities can work together across time to create lasting expressions of shared values and common dreams. The hidden language of Gothic cathedrals, once we learn to read it, reveals itself to be not the property of any single religious tradition or historical period, but rather a universal vocabulary for expressing humanity's most fundamental aspirations toward beauty, meaning, and transcendence. These buildings continue to teach us how architecture can serve not merely functional needs, but also the deep human requirement for spaces that inspire wonder, encourage reflection, and provide environments where individual souls can encounter the eternal questions that define human existence at its most profound levels. In the end, the Gothic cathedral stands as testimony to the possibility that human beings can create, through patient dedication and collective effort, works that transcend the limitations of individual lifetime and achieve a kind of immortality through their continued capacity to inspire, uplift, and instruct across the centuries. These manuscripts of stone and light remain open books, waiting to be read by each new generation that discovers within their spaces the enduring power of human creativity dedicated to serving the highest aspirations of the human spirit. And so we return from our journey through time, from those medieval streets where morning mist clung to cobblestones, back to our present moment. Perhaps as we've wandered together through these cathedral spaces, you've felt something of what countless visitors have experienced across the centuries. That sense of standing in the presence of something larger than ourselves, something that speaks to the deepest parts of who we are as human beings. Thank you for taking this quiet hour to explore these hidden languages with me. If this journey has stirred something in you, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Maybe you visited one of these cathedrals yourself, or perhaps this has inspired you to seek out spaces of beauty and contemplation in your own corner of the world. Whatever thoughts this has brought to mind, I hope you'll share them with our gentle community here. Until we meet again for another exploration, I wish you moments of wonder in your days, spaces of quiet reflection, and the kind of beauty that lifts the spirit and reminds us of all the magnificent things human hands and hearts can create when they work together across time. Take care and thank you for being part of our community.